the Eternals. Maybe we'll do an episode at some point about like where we go deep on the Jack Kirby comic. But for now, the trailer dropped.
Yeah, that's fresh.
Yeah,
like hot off the internet presses.
Mm-hmm. A lot of opinions about it.
I mean, I'm coming in, truth be told, cold on the Eternals.
Well, that's not entirely true because you did see the leaked Lego Eternals designs.
I was eyeballing those. I'm like a bloodhound for Lego drops.
Yeah.
So I did see those designs. So yeah, that was my first eyeballing on the new Eternals movie.
Yeah, me too. So it's kind of like it, kind of tempered my expectations by the time the trailer rolled around because it was kind of like, just looking at this, like the costumes and stuff in the comic are like those, primary costume colors that you would have in a superhero comic from the 70s, like, red, yellow, blue, super bright in your face. And then, you see the Legos and then the trailer, and it's like, okay, it's scaled back, it's toned down, so it's like, that wasn't shocking when I saw it. And then also, like, in the comic, I think issue 1, you see, like, the spaceship of the space gods in, like, one of the last panels or whatever, but then in, like, issue 2, there's, like, a double-page splash, you get, like, a beautiful view of it, and then, because I saw the Lego, I saw that it went from this, like, weird, kind of, like, organic-shaped, Yes album cover, kind of, like, spaceship, by way of Jack Kirby. It turned into this, like, just, like, this giant, like, triangle wedge. So then when the trailer came out, I wasn't, like, shocked. Like, hey, that's not what that spaceship looked like in the comic, man.
You're like the top pin comment on the trailer. Like, you have, like, the turd emojis.
When I was a kid, I saw a UFO. Not saying it's a spaceship, but it was like something flying through the sky, and I didn't know what it was. And it kind of looked like the thing in the Eternals. Now the thing in the Eternals trailer is like this giant, like, flying triangle. The thing I saw was like a giant flying square. It was like a square flying through the sky.
Tom, we're gonna have to do a Total Recall show. Skywalker, live from the outskirts of Skywalker Ranch, behind the Hollywood sign. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's Stephen King's mansion.
Yeah.
The Kecksburg UFO Festival. Total Recall show live from the Kecksburg.
But no, I saw UFO. I saw like a spinning square go through the sky when I was a kid, and then like a couple years later, and again that's all I saw. It was just this square, just went from here to there, and just like didn't see it again. A couple years later, I had like a dream where like I had a closer encounter, like where it was like I saw that square again, and then and like had like more of like okay, that's definitely a spaceship, kind of. But it was a dream. It was a dream. So, but this like sort of flying triangle was kind of reminiscent of the square that I saw.
The movie Fire in the Sky with D.B. Sweeney scared the shit out of me, and like any X-Files stuff, like Unsolved Mystery stuff, that always creeped me out. Like, and then I was all in on the remember Alien Autopsy.
Right, sure, yeah, we've talked about that in previous episodes.
Like, aren't there, like, I think some UFO like videos have been recently leaked as well.
Right.
It's like the Eternals, and then what about the? Is there like the like the bad?
The Deviants. Okay, yeah.
Are they
now? How much of this? Because like my brain is kind of like filling in all the blanks that I know from the comics. Like, did they mention the Deviants in the trailer, or you're just learning this from like reading? Or from the Legos.
Yeah, like from like the Legos and just like
the Deviants. The Deviant Legos look super cool, and they kind of remind the Deviant Legos kind of remind me of like Micronauts or something, like some of the more exotic like Micronaut monster characters. But like so like in the comic.
So humans, Eternals, and Deviants.
Yeah, there's 3 species on Earth, and they all descend from ape, and it's the Eternals, the Deviants, and humans, and and the I think even like, and this is all laid out by Jack Kirby in the comic, and I think even like the Deviants, Eternals, and humans are all considered like humans, like what I mean, like that the human animal, like. That they're all related, but they all share a common ancestor. At least they share an ape. And like in like the Jack Kirby comic, the space gods, which are these giant, like kind of like robot-y, like they're at maybe they're they're like god machines or whatever. At the very least, they look like robots, but we don't know what's underneath. Maybe it's like more circuitry and stuff underneath, or or Kirby Crackle or whatever, or maybe it's some kind of like organic being. But they came to Earth, and they have some kind of purpose. We're not 100% sure of, but they came to Earth, did experiments on the apes that they found, and they created 3 different species, and one was man, who's kind of like the in-between guy, and then they had the deviants, who are kind of like, they have like a very, they're you could almost call them like mutants or something, because they have this very mutable, changeable genetic structure. Like our genetic structure is changeable, but it's somewhat, it retains its shape, but then the deviant is like completely mutable. So like your child could be completely genetically unrelated to you. They could mutate, and then vice versa. Like, or you could have like a deviant could have like 3 different kids, and each one's got completely different genetic makeup. I read all the Kirby Eternals comics, and I read all the Neil Gaiman, John Romita Jr. Eternals comics, and then I've read to varying degrees the other stuff. So that there's whole, and so then the deviants are like all our legends about like monsters and goblins and things that go bump in the night and stuff. Those are all based on encounters with the deviants. And then the Eternals are like, they live forever, they're indestructible, they're unkillable. Like no matter what you do, you can't kill one. You could drop an A-bomb on one and it won't kill it. And they are like our basis for any kind of story we had of like encounters with like the gods or Greek gods or angels or whatever. Like, they're responsible for
reading through like the IMDb like cast list, like the names of the characters are even like a couple like letter or 2 off from like, or like I'm not in letter 2, but you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah,
like,
no, exactly, and that's a Jack Kirby. That's like a Jack Kirby trope almost, where you have a character whose name is like almost a character from mythology. But yeah, so you have like Icarus, IK, which that's this guy here, and he's in issue 1 he's Ike Harris, and then he reveals himself to be Icarus, and it's like, oh, he's the basis for the character from mythology Icarus, and like through a game of telephone over the ages, the story of like this guy who could fly got kind of mangled and misinterpreted and became this story of like this kid whose dad makes these wings and then he flies and then like all that stuff, but like it's based on this guy.
That's awesome. Like Robert De Niro from Angel Heart, Louis Cypher.
Yeah, right. Exactly. I love those kind of names.
Me too.
I have my character who's kind of like a Kirby-esque god kind of character called Adopus, and like I never did this in any of the published comics, but I had this idea of him having a secret identity. He was Ed Opus, and like he's like Irish. It's like Ed O apostrophe Piss, Ed Opus.
That's so good.
But yeah, so yeah, there's a bunch of and then there's Circe, like the character from I think the Odyssey, which would have been CIRCE, and then in this it's SERSI. But anyway, yeah, they're all, and Zuras is Zeus, and so yeah, you can go down the list. So like that's the idea, is that these are all the Eternals are all characters who've been mistaken for various characters from like mythology in the Bible. Even like so Ike Harris, Icarus or whatever. He was spotted in ancient Greece and then became part of the story of Icarus. But also he was in the Jack Kirby comic. He was the bird, the dove that carried the olive branch or whatever to the Noah's Ark.
Okay. That
was him, but they mistook him for a bird, and that became the story of Noah. Described Icarus. So like it's a lot of that kind of stuff in Kirby, and it's a lot of fun. And then like Neil Gaiman and John Romita Jr. They had some more fun playing with that kind of stuff. And I'm assuming that's going to be a big part of the movie, is kind of like like Fractured Fairy and like the Marvel. You're going to see flashbacks to like the Marvel Universe version of like this and that. These tales from antiquity. With
the cast, I know we got Angelina Jolie, I think, in there.
Athena, and like Yeah, like if you see the comic, it's like, yeah, she's like one of the standout characters in the comic.
I liked that the cast wasn't like super A-listers, or not even. Sorry,
Right,
sorry,
you a bunch of losers.
Sorry, a bunch of C-listers.
Yeah.
But like, I'm really into it that like, I don't have any kind of like preconceived.
Yeah, it looks like an ensemble, like a genuine ensemble. And the Eternals is like one of these comics that like I love so much. It's like, you know, one of my favorite comics ever, but it's like it's not very like well known. It's kind of, and like a lot of people get it confused with the Inhumans. A lot of people are like the Eternals and the Inhumans. Where to me they're kind of like completely different things. But it's like, so it's just kind of funny seeing this like now entering like the mainstream and like the rest of the world getting a hold of these characters that I feel a certain, you know.
Are you gotta be excited that like.
Oh yeah,
that this is like
I'm
bubbling.
Yes, I'm super and
erupting to the forefront.
Like, I got into this comic like probably like 1994, 1995. It's a comic from like I think from 1976 when it came out. I didn't learn about it till 1994, 1995, and like it was like love at first sight. And the first issue I saw was the final issue of the comic. Now, so it's got this like there's like pyramid exploding. And then this like, you know, cool looking like superhero guy that I'd never seen before. And I'm like, I gotta get this, and I, you know, grabbed it. And then, and again, that was like the last issue. And then it's like, oh, let me find out what happened before all this. And so I eventually, you know, got the whole series and stuff. And it has its ups and downs. Like the first 13 issues are some of Kirby's best. It's like magical, so great. And then editorial interference kind of turns into shit for a little while, you know, like. And there's people who like love the shitty issues too, and the shitty issues have some you know they're Kirby comics, so they're gonna have like some fun stuff in them. But it's kind of like those first 13 are so great, and then it kind of turns into shit for a little while, and then like the last 2 issues are like a return to form. It starts to get good again, you know. And so like the final issue that I got was like, okay, yeah, it was a good one. The issue before that's good, and then the first 13 are like and the 13th issue is like one of my all-time favorite comics of all time.
I'm excited to read this.
Yeah, I'll let you borrow it. It's really good. It's a lot of fun. In the Jack Kirby, The Epic Life of the King of Comics, like there's like a section of the book that's kind of like, you know, his legacy and stuff. And so in there I reference, you know, the Eternals movie coming out, and it's kind of like it was like exciting because it's like first it starts off, you know, you have these movies made that are based on like Jack Kirby comics, and then his name's nowhere to be found. And then it's like, you know, it's like the X-Men movie where it's like special, you know, after the world's longest credit sequence in tiny letters, like after they like thank the town council and stuff like that, they say special thanks to Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, you know. And it was like that was the first X-Men movie, and it was, you know, just disgusting or whatever. And so, but then little by little, Jack Kirby's name gets more and more prominent, gets closer and closer to the beginning of the movie. And now we're finally having...
Is it a solo billing?
This is a solo Jack Kirby. Stan Lee didn't co-create this. You know, Larry Lieber did. Like, that would always be the thing that would kill me, too. Like, it's bad enough seeing it's based on a comic created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. It's bad enough seeing Stan Lee's name come first. But what's really galling is when Jack Kirby gets third billing after Stan Lee and Larry Lieber. It's like, based on a comic by Stan Lee, Larry Lieber, and Jack Kirby. It's like... I mean, it's so nice Jack Kirby getting credit being up, but it's like, come on, at least put him ahead of Larry Lieber at least.
I got some bad news. In the Total Recall, our inbox, I just received word that Stan Lee is going to be first billed on this.
Well, I wouldn't.
How did he work his way? How did he do it?
I mean, I wouldn't
He's
be
dead, right?
I wouldn't be surprised if Stan Lee's name is in the credits prior to Jack Kirby's, because I know like Stan Lee had some kind of deal of like being sort of like, you know, some kind of like executive producer, you know, like having some kind of like movie credit in these movies, even if he didn't create he didn't create Howard the Duck, but if there's a Howard the Duck movie, it would probably say like, you know, executive producer Stan Lee or whatever. But when it gets to the part where it says based on a comic by, it's only going to be Jack Kirby's name. So as long as they don't fuck that up, like when that credit, like that's the main reason I'm going to see this movie, is to be sitting in a theater and watching based on a comic created by Jack Kirby, no other name, just Jack Kirby. Like, I'm gonna be smiling ear to ear when I see that. And then anything else is bonus. Anything else is gravy after that.
We're gonna be right there watching this. We're
and there's gonna be pop. We're gonna be like going nuts when the Jack Kirby name comes up. But if it doesn't, they're gonna get an angry letter from you know, like when they started making, you know, movies like these, like this, you know, starting with like Blade and then X-Men and the Spider-Man with Tobey Maguire. When they started making those movies, I thought, you know, it's really going to be something when they get to like characters like the Eternals and the Inhumans, like when they get to the deep cut characters, that's going to be pretty cool. And it's like, okay, well now we're there. Like
the time has come.
Yeah, you don't get any more deep cut than, I mean, like Guardians of the Galaxy was pretty deep cut. That was like, whoa, like they went, you know, that was unexpected, and it, you know, they made it into a hit. They were like Z-list. I mean, like I love the comic. I love the various incarnations of the comic, but they were like Z-list Marvel characters that became like A-list Marvel characters. Names. Yeah, so that's what they're expecting with the Eternals too. Yeah,
it's gonna happen.
Jack Kirby and like this Jack Kirby's Eternals comic got like shit on so bad during the '70s. Jack Kirby's return to Marvel, and there was like just a lot of chatter of like, oh, Jack, you're not as good as you were back in the '60s. You know, like, oh, this new stuff stinks, and he was doing it all solo. So it's like, you need Stan Lee. When you're not working with Stan Lee, your stuff's shit. And it was just like so galling. And then, and like, there was kind of like a smear campaign coming from within the Marvel offices. There were like writers, or wannabe writers who like worked in the Marvel offices who like, they wanted to write the comics that Jack Kirby drew. Like they wanted to be the writer or the dialogue. Like they wanted to be Stan Lee. Yeah, exactly. And they were just pissed that Jack demanded to like write his own stuff. So their solution was they were gonna cram the letters columns with letters that say, "Oh, Jack, your drawings are great, but your dialogue stinks. Your stories stink. You need to work with a writer." And blah blah. And it was like this never-ending.
So if folks read those comics, they can see the smear campaign letters in there.
Yeah, I have the comics, and they're all in there, and it's like, I've never seen that in a comic book before. Like in comic books, they'll run positive letters, they'll run negative letters, but like when you assemble your letters column, you're gonna, you know, it's gonna be like 10-1 positive letters and stuff like that. But this was like all like, it was this like drumbeat of boom, you know, Jack, you stink, Jack, you stink. And so then like, it's like a weird effect, because especially like, these are comics that are sort of made ostensibly for kids. And so you think of a kid reading it and seeing these letters from what's in their mind, other kids, saying that this comic, like, why would you have a comic that says this comic stinks?
I was gonna say, like, that's bad, like,
yeah,
just from a business standpoint, like,
yeah,
having a negative, like, energy in your comic.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a hater. It's like having the trolls and the negative commenters in your comic book, and then you like are spending money to get those that shit talk engraved in your comic. Like it's so ridiculous. And Jack Kirby was he was like, what's going on? Like he was kind of livid about, and like, you know, and you know, eventually he was able to get control of the letters columns, and from then on, all his Marvel books, the letters would come to his office, and then, you know, he and his staff or whatever would put together the letters columns. But up until then, it was like, and it is like a bummer. Like it's kind of like poison inside these comics, because like you're reading this like I'm reading an issue of it and I'm loving it. I'm sailing. This is so much fun. And then I see, oh, here's the letters column. And I start reading. I was like,
from the Funky Flash.
Yeah, it's like I was, you know, it bums you out. And you're like, oh, is there something wrong with me that I think this is like the greatest comic I've ever read? Because all the letters are telling me it's shit. And that was one of the but anyway, so like this comic was being, you know, shit on from day one. So it's like the Eternals need like a comeback story, and it's funny. You know, like Stan Lee, like Jack Kirby didn't know who to turn to. He's like, this, I'm getting sabotaged. My book's getting sabotaged, and so he went to Stan Lee. He's like all the stuff that they went through, all their ups and downs, you know, being at odds with each other and stuff. It's like, you know, like, okay, Stan, like, you know, like we're, you know, at least we're the same generation, and like, and these kids are killing me, and we're the same, like, help me out, but and from all accounts, like Stan Lee was like, you know, livid and horrified and like couldn't, like, and again, even like just, okay, let's pretend that Stan like hates Jack or doesn't care, but you know, whatever. like just from a business standpoint of like, hey, like I'm the Marvel Comics guy and I want Marvel Comics to be the best they can, and you guys are putting shitty letters in a Marvel comic, you know?
Yeah, it's like, quit doing that for the love of God.
But so Stan interceded on Jack's behalf, and then Jack, you know, got control of the letters columns. But so it's this big mess, and like, so like one of the issues that they kept bringing up in the letters columns of like saying that, oh, Jack's a shitty writer, is they would say like, Jack, you said that the Eternals are indestructible. Nothing can kill them. They live forever, and there's nothing. Are you telling me that if an atom bomb dropped on an Eternal, they'd just like say, oh, that's no big deal, they'd walk, you know, and or you're telling, you know, and they're like, even like in the Thor comics, they're immortal, they'll live forever, but you still can kill them, and so like, Jack, you haven't thought this through, but like, it's like, just like let him tell this, you know, like, but they were kind of like saying that he was an idiot or whatever for this like, this like creative choice that he made. And so I did like a fan comic about the Eternals, like at some point in like the early 2000s, where I answered those questions. Like it was like a fuck you to those letter writers.
Awesome.
Where I was like, this is what it looks like. So it was a guy who was an Eternal who got like a nuclear bomb dropped on him, and he exploded. And so, but he has to live the remainder of his life out as this kind of like exploded creature, kind of like
fucking brilliant.
Kind of like Beetlejuice, like how the afterlife of the Beetlejuice, like whatever way you died, like you have to be that way.
Oh yeah,
it's kind of like that.
Alec Baldwin's head can like slide.
Yeah, or like the guy who's like flat with like tire tracks on him.
Love it.
So it's kind of like that, and so he meets this Eternal who's kind of like this, looks almost like a tree or something because he's been like exploded. And then when like Neil Gaiman and John Romita Jr. did their Eternals comic, like Neil Gaiman gave like his answer to those letter writers, and it was like the deviants, they capture Icarus and they try to kill him a bunch of ways. So first they like throw a grenade at him or whatever, and like, but he's okay, like he's hurt but he's okay, like he heals, he gets better. And then it's like they try a bunch of stuff, and then eventually I think they like just like dip him in a vat of acid, and at that point he just dissolves. He's gone. He's done. But then in the Eternals city, they have like this regeneration machine, and then out pops a new Icarus, and it's like he's back. And so it's like he came up with like a mechanism to explain, and a mechanism that had Kirby continued the series, that seems like a solution that Kirby might, like maybe that's what Kirby had in his back pocket, maybe he had something different. But it was kind of like, it was the same thing of like, no, Jack Kirby has told you that they are indestructible. That you know, and so they are indestructible, you know, and it's, you know, and here's why.
He knew they were troll letters when the name was like Philip Q. Haterade.
Well, some of the names, some of the people ended up being writers at Marvel, you know, but they wrote it as if they were like, but it was like kind of like, so they were either guys who were working in the office or friends of guys working in the office, you know, it was you know, there was some shady dealings going on.
Hey, Jack, I'm just a kid.
Yeah.
They're like, you really should let Doug from the mailroom on the second floor next to your desk, right? He like it's real specific.
Yeah, and Jack, you should team up with a writer. In fact, I hear there's a guy in the mailroom, and Jack, I've sent you a picture of myself in with this letter, and it's like a picture of like this like grown up in the '70s. With like, but with like, you know, Buster Brown, you know, like
he's got a hat with a spinning
a big lollipop and you know, pigtails, and, like Buster Brown.
But he has like a huge beard and aviators on.
He's dressed like Stinky from the Abbott and Costello show, but yeah, otherwise very '70s. But then with this like Stinky from the Abbott and Costello show costume on, you know, that's Eternals history. And like, when I let you borrow my copies of the Eternals,
can't wait.
What you might notice is that in cases where I could remove the letters page from the comic, I have done so. Sometimes there's the letters page on the other side is an actual page of the comic, so I couldn't do that.
So you cut the cancer out of those
the cancer out of those comics. And then in cases where I couldn't just remove the page, I would staple the pages together so that you wouldn't be able to read the letters, because it would hurt I would be reading these comics, having a great time, and then you just can't help it. You know, you turn and then here's and like even your eye just kind of scans it, and then you're bummed out.
Yeah, even if you weren't like focused reading, you just absorb that.
Yeah, exactly.
Bad vibes.
Yeah, exactly. I don't need that when I'm grooving on some like prime Jack Kirby, and I have lent these comics out to people over the years. And they are always like, "Hey, what's going on? Why is this staple?" They're like, "I want to see what's in here." And it's like, "No, you don't want to know. You don't want to know."
It like I rip them open,
yeah,
and then it cuts to the guy getting melted in Raiders of the Lost Ark.
That's the Eternal. So I'm looking forward to it.
We'll be there right.
Yeah, I'm pulling
from
forward.
Jump Street.
I can't think of a Marvel movie that I haven't enjoyed. You know?
Oh, it's gonna be great. Yeah, like we
even the bad ones are like 10 times better than like the best superhero movies that came out when I was a kid.
Oh heck yeah! Like we got the Eternals coming up, and then what else is like even on the? I'm like kind of besides the Eternals, that's just been like
Black Widow.
Black
Widow's like July. So we'll see Black Widow first, and then we'll like I think like all the movie studios, they're like these movies that they spent $1 zillion on that they think are going to be huge hits. They're holding those back. So like that's. I think they got high hopes for the Eternals, and I think it's going to be awesome.
I do too. I have a blast. I love these superhero movies are great, and
it sucks having to wait till November, but you know it'll be here like before.
Yeah.
Kumail Nanjiani, like I loved him from like the moment I saw him in like Portlandia. Like he was like anytime he'd show up on a Portlandia episode, like
he's great on Silicon Valley too.
Yes, he was great on Silicon Valley, and then like they had these like Old Navy commercials that he was and he's talking about like what he likes about what he likes in a shirt. I like a shirt with 2 armholes, a head hole. Like it's like he's hilarious even on this like kind of like shitty commercial. He's hilarious. So like he's and then
The Big Sick,
that great movie. So but it was funny because like he's like one of the Eternals, and like I don't know that I had heard that he was in the Eternals by this point, but like I'd be listening to like different comedy podcasts, listen to like Pete Holmes' podcast or whatever, and like it would always be people talking like, "Have you seen Kamal lately?"
Is this where is he yoked? Is this where
exactly
he's yoked for this?
Yeah, because everybody's like,
diced.
He's like Arnold, he's like Schwarzenegger, like he's
on the gas.
Exactly, like and like that would be the talk on like all these various comedy podcasts is like how buff Kumail Nanjiani has become, where I think prior to that he was never out. Yeah, he was never out of shape. But he was probably like skinny, if anything. But like now he's like and everybody's talking about and then eventually like I think he might have been on the Pete Holmes podcast, or he was on like some podcast, and he's talking like I'm in really good shape, and it's like he's like I don't want to be the first out of shape superhero. Like I'm gonna be a superhero in a Marvel movie. I don't want to be the first out of shape superhero in a Marvel movie. So. Like so so like in the trailer, like I finally see it, and it's like holy shit! Like that's not the guy from The Big Sick, That's not the nerd. Like he's a nerd in The Big Sick.
He was hanging out with Stallone. He got some of that like.
Well, that's the thing. It's like tread carefully because like you don't want to go in Joe Piscopo territory. Like it's like kind of like bad news for your comedy career if you get too muscular.
You're so fucking right, Tom. Like when I think of like Joe Piscopo, I was just watching some Joe Piscopo sketches. Like he's hilarious.
Oh, remember when Joe Piscopo was the funniest guy on earth?
Do you remember
Wise Guys?
What? Yeah, it like, but even when I was little, like a little kid, I thought that like he's so ripped. How he can't be funny if he's muscular. Like, if you're a buff guy, it doesn't equate to.
It's tough, but I mean, like he's. I think he's playing the smart money where it's like,
Frank Sinatra's hilarious.
Like a muscular comedian is a tough sell, but like an out of shape superhero is even worse. Yeah.
Usually comedy comes from like low status, so like if you're like got white teeth and like you're on stage, I'm like right, Ken doll is like.
He Kumail Nanjiani. He plays Kingo, and that's like. Okay, Eternals is a super obscure Marvel comic, a super obscure Jack Kirby comic. Like, from the guy who created household names like Captain America, X-Men, Avengers, Hulk, the Eternal, like the Eternal. You didn't have Eternals underoos when you were a kid, I'm assuming. It's like a deep cut.
I like drop my pants and have them on right now.
But then Kamal Nanjiani is playing a deep cut Eternal. Like I think the character Kingo appeared in maybe like 2 panels of like a Jack Kirby, because there's like this one issue where all the Eternals get together for this thing called the Unimind. It's this like ritual that they do where if there's like a really big problem going on Earth, all the Eternals come from the far corners of the Earth and converge on Olympia, which is the Eternals' capital city, what like Olympus is based on. And so they all come together, and then they enter this kind of like fire, this blue fire thing, and they merge and become this one being called the Unimind. Again, it's like one of those things. It's an early, like it was one of the first like Jack Kirby comics that I'd read, and it's just this amazing. It's this like giant brain thing that just forms and just starts floating through space and is calculating and trying to figure out like how to solve this problem. But anyway, so when all the Eternals get together for this, it's like, oh, who's that guy and who's that guy? And I did, because like there's some humans with them, like sort of like the supporting cast or whatever, who's like, I recognize that guy. And so Kingo was, it's like, that's that famous actor. He plays the samurai movie. So like Kingo in the comics seemed like he was supposed to be based on Toshiro Mifune from the Seven Samurai and Yojimbo. Oh, wow. That he's this famous actor who plays a samurai, and then it's like, oh, that's why his samurai characters are so convincing, is because he actually lived through the samurai era, and he was a samurai, So that was Kingo. So but again, like, super cool character, is in the comic for 2 panels. So that's Kamal Nanjiani's character. And looking at the trailer, it looks like they've like reinterpreted him. So instead of being like a star of samurai movies, which like samurai movies aren't really like a dominant genre anymore or whatever. So like instead of being a star of samurai movies, it looks like he's a star of like Bollywood musicals. Like it seemed like that was sort of the production in like a big like Bollywood musical production.
They mix it up a little bit.
Yeah, so that's like the reinterpret, but it's like so yeah, like that's so if Kingo of the Eternals becomes a household name, that's like a huge that's a huge victory. That's a huge victory for like Kirby fans around the world, because it doesn't get more obscure than. I'm trying to think of like in the Eternals, who like doesn't show up until issue 13, which is like the last issue before the comic turns to shit, and he doesn't even have a name. He's called the Forgotten One. But the Forgotten One is in more panels than Kingo. Yeah, I'm trying to think of a more obscure Jack Kirby. Like
you see just some like little kid with like a Kingo T-shirt.
No, exactly. Like if the next time I'm talking to my mom, and she's like, oh yeah, King. Like if she starts just talking about Kingo,
Kamal Nanjiani is great as Kingo.
Because that was like, to me, like when the Iron Man movies came out, and then all of a sudden, like our parents' generation are talking about Pepper Potts, like like Pepper Potts was like.
You're like, what world are we living in?
Yeah, exactly. That was Pepper Potts was a deep cut, and now Pepper Potts is like on Entertainment Tonight, they're talking about Pepper Potts on Entertainment Tonight. So it's gonna be interesting when like Kingo is trying to think like the Goozle Bobber, like if the Goozle Bobber became a household name. I mean, he's not Marvel. I'm trying to think of like a Marvel character. I don't know, the Impossible Man or something. But like Kingo, yeah, it really is like literally like 2 panels. I'm trying to think who's like a Kirby character who was in 2 panels. I don't know if Neil Gaiman did anything with Kingo, but I know like the current Eternals comic. I think Kingo's featured in there. I don't remember if he was in.
So are all the deviants bad, or are they like? Is there like some?
No, I mean, of course, like it's a Jack Kirby comic, so like there's good bad guys and bad good guys, and it's not. It's more nuanced than that. So there, like.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, and there's even like a couple issues. There's where they like go to the land of the deviants. Lemuria is where the deviants live, and so there's like a couple issues where they go there, and like you have like real sympathy for the deviants, and then even have like scenes where like some of the deviants are like even the deviants don't like they're too weird for the deviants, and so the deviants kind of like round them up and like murder them, and it's like it's real heartbreaking and stuff. But yeah, there's a character, there's Crow, who starts out like he's kind of like the warlord of the deviants. He's like and he's like the lead. You know, he's not the top. There's this guy called Great Toad who kind of looks like Jabba the Hutt, and he's like, and this is, you know, a year before Star Wars comes out. But he's like the leader of the deviants. But then Crow is kind of like his like second in command, and he's the guy who like leads the attack and stuff. He's like the general. But he and Thena have this like love story, like that they were in love a long time, you know, centuries ago, and it was kind of like possibly the basis of like the story of like what was it, Hades and Eurydice, maybe. Like it was like the story of like the daughter of Demeter and Hades and their like, you know, story that it's based on Crow and Thena. But anyway, so Crow is kind of, you know, he's kind of like he wants to lead the deviants in a different direction than anything. So like that story kind of plays out. But then when Thena visits Lemuria and sees all these like atrocities that are going on in Lemuria among the deviants, then she like there's this like gladiatorial games, and so she meets two deviants. One is called Carcass, and he's this like giant red monster, super cool Jack Kirby design of like this giant red monster, and he turns out he's like a poet. Like he doesn't want to fight, he's like a poet. And then there's this other deviant called the Reject, and he's like super handsome. He looks like an Eternal. He's like real muscular and handsome, and but he's like savage. He's like a killer. He's crazy. And so Thena kind of like adopts these two, and she takes them with her out of Lemuria and brings them to Olympia, like the city of the Eternals. And so like, you know, yeah. So there's you know, and then there's like evil Eternals, you know.
That I'm so stoked for this, man. We're gonna be right
We're
there.
gonna save us the aisle seats.
Yes,
we are the 21st century Siskel and Ebert.
Yes, I can't wait to read your copies of the Eternals.
Sure,
That's
yeah.
exciting.
Mhm.
I won't remove. The
Yeah,
pages.
don't remove the staples that are holding.
Now that I know what's
the
in
evil.
case
It's like the Necronomicon or something.
Yeah,
There's like
it's
evil trapped in between those staples.
It's like threatening to rip apart.
So yeah, you've been watching the Eternals episode of Total Recall Show. I'm Tom Scioli, author of Jack Kirby, The Epic Life of the King of Comics, and Fantastic Four Grand Design, and Transformers vs. G.I. Joe.
I'm Matt Zeoli.
You can check out my Patreon. Go to patreon.com and search Tom Scioli. Follow me on Twitter at Tom Scioli.
Follow me on Instagram at cinema_tune.
Okay, and we'll see you at the Eternals.